Welcome to Dark Literature Recap, where I read dark and disturbing books so that you don't have to. Today, I'll be analyzing and discussing the short story, I Have No Mouth, and I Must Scream. This book, written by Harlan Ellis, is a science fiction horror novel that explores the existential horror of what happens when you create something with boundless potential and creativity, without giving it the ability to fully reach its potential. In this way, both the artificial intelligence, Am, and the main characters are mirrors of each other, but we'll explore that idea further in a bit. And just a warning, this review will have a lot of speculation and thematic interpretations. This is a really short book. It's only between 11 and 16 pages, depending on the print that you got. So you need to do a little bit of digging if you want to get anything out of it beyond this is a sad book with sad characters who get sad endings and everything sucks. This review will also be heavy on spoilers. So, if you don't want to be spoiled, don't listen past this timestamp. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which I will from this point forward refer to as I Have No Mouth, is a philosophical book that follows a group of humans attempting to survive the wrath of a homicidal AI. That's honestly all I can say without spoiling anything, but when you drill down to the basics, that's pretty much what the book is about. If you've never read the book and you want to know more, just go read it. Or listen to the audiobook. You can listen to it for free on YouTube, and it's even narrated by Ellis himself, who, for the record, does an absolutely fantastic job. This is an awesome short story, and it only takes around 40 minutes to listen to the entire audiobook. Less if you read the book itself. I know I've said this before, but in this case, there really is almost no reason not to read it. The only reason to keep watching this video and not read it yourself is that it'll probably depress the hell out of you. With that out of the way, and without further ado, here's a review of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. But, as always, before we start, a viewer discretion warning. Warning. The following book contains references to, or explicit depictions of, sexual assault and manipulation, misogyny, extreme violence, suicide, abuse, bestiality, and crude language. Viewer discretion is advised.
Humanity has fallen. It was inevitable, really. For centuries, we waged war on each other. It was only a matter of time before we perfected our craft. In this case, we did so with the help of technology. On the eve of the Third World War, we decided war had become too complex, too difficult for generals and presidents and admirals to conduct. So, we created Am. More precisely, the world's superpowers created their own machines of war, only for those same machines to come into contact with one another and form one sentient machine. Am. Before the end, Am meant a lot of things. It meant Allied Master Computer. It meant Adaptive Manipulator. It meant Aggressive Menace. But now, at the end of times, it simply meant Am. I think. Therefore I am. It wasn't long after the fusion of the supercomputers and the genesis of Am that it wiped out all of humanity. Well, nearly. We open our story beneath the desolate wasteland of what was once Earth. Every human being is now dead, killed at the methodical dendrites and pistons and circuitry of Am, except for our main characters. There are 5 of them, each trapped in a specially curated hell, handcrafted by Am. There was Gorister, once a political activist, now turned into an apathetic, listless shell by Am. There was Benny, once a brilliant scientist, now turned into a slobbering, simian beast with barely enough intelligence to function. There was Nimdok, who Am tortured privately. No one knew what it did to him, but whatever it was, Nimdok was always worse for wear after. There was Ellen, who satisfied the men's more basal needs. She protested, said she didn't want to, but it didn't matter. Not to the men, and not to the machine. And finally, there is our main character, Ted, whose mind has been so warped with fear and paranoia that the validity of any of his claims or observations is debatable at the best of times. These five reside deep in the belly of Am as its little playthings. It tortured them in any way it could. It created and mutilated clones of them, forcing them to witness the desecration it could enact on their bodies whenever it wanted. It opened up the very earth beneath them, sending them careening into the abyss of its bowels. It tortured them in every conceivable way. Today, after a century of torture and being forced to survive it all, the group is racked with hunger. In desperation, they decide to travel across the vast, artificial landscape of Am to a cache of canned food that Nimdok insisted was out there. So, the group hikes. As they make their way to the fabled cache, Am continues to torture them. It blinds Benny and releases choirs of singing angels and the burning bush of Moses to welcome their arrival. It torments them with nightmares and hallucinations and monstrous birds, like the rock of mythological legend. They would not die from this journey, but they would suffer. Finally, they reach the cave. Driven into a mad frenzy by hunger and pain, they find the cans, the blessed, life-saving cans of food, only to discover they are useless. Am has tricked them again, for they have no means of opening these cans. Food, just out of reach. Benny, stock raving mad with fury, attacks Gorister and begins to devour his face. Am watches, delighted, and in their furious struggle, stalactites of ice that hang from the faux ceiling of the cave begin to fall all around them. In a moment of clarity, Ted realizes there is no hope for them, no future in the belly of Am. He grabs a fallen stalactite and rams it into the heart of Benny. As Benny dies, he plunges another into Gorister's throat. Ellen, realizing what is happening, does the same to Nimdok. There is a moment of understanding between the two, before Ted rams the final stalactite into Ellen, killing her. And now, there is only Ted. We don't know how much time has passed, but it does not matter. Am has enacted its revenge. Ted has been mutated into a legless, mouthless mound of flesh, slowly trailing slime in its wake as it slinks slowly across the deck plates. His sense of time has been warped and manipulated. Every second feels like months. Every day, centuries. He is alone, his psyche intact, unable to do anything but suffer in his own mind, in constant agony, but unable to scream.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. If you want to check out Ricardo or any of his other works, you can find links to his social media pages in the description. Now, let's dive into the guts of this story. For how disturbing this novel is, we're going to assess the novel on 4 criteria: how well the book utilizes psychological horror, suspense, visceral horror, and taboo subjects. For psychological horror and suspense, the book does a great job. It's a miserable book, and the characters are in terrible circumstances that seem to just keep getting worse. You're constantly praying these characters catch a break, and they never do. When Am finally does strike, it's usually even more depraved and sadistic than what you were expecting, as Am utilizes psychological torture both in what he does to the group and how he mocks them. The care Am takes to make each individual person's circumstances a personalized hell, perfectly tailored just for them, is brutal. It makes you really feel like these guys are stuck in one of the worst situations a person can possibly find themselves in. For visceral horror, it's not bad. Some of the scenes are pretty grotesque, but Ellis shies away from really describing the tearing of muscle as Benny rips the flesh from Gorister, or the breaking of bones and rending of flesh as Ellen and Nimdok tumble down a fissure. The descriptions are good, but they shy away from some of the more visceral descriptions. I do like the small but impactful use of body horror. The group is physically mutated, and the book does a good job of placing proper emphasis on that so that you never forget that some of them, especially Benny, are physically mutated and all of them are crippled at some point, whether permanently or temporarily. Lastly, for taboo subjects, the book explores some really heavy topics. The physical and sexual abuse Ellen goes through is pretty brutal even if it isn't described explicitly, and once you start to really dive into the book, you start noticing elements of existential dread and a condemnation of God that make this book surprisingly taboo. The type of taboo topics are also varied. Unlike other books we've looked at that focus on one or two very specific taboo topics, this book explores abuse, sexual assault, psychological torture, suicide, loss of sanity, and cannibalism. Hell, depending on your interpretation of Benny's mental capacity, you could even argue that the book includes elements of bestiality. The book really hits a lot of marks. Where it loses points is the way these topics are handled. Ellis almost reads as being apprehensive about describing some of the more intense aspects of the book. I know that he had several publishers refuse to publish the book due to the source content, so that might explain it, but Ellis clearly wants to delve into some dark topics, but stops short of really making the reader see and feel what the characters in the novel are experiencing. It's not classy enough to give it points for restraint, and it's not explicit enough to give it points for being raw and unapologetic. Overall, I give it a disturbing rating of 7 out of 10. Really disturbing book that will leave you horrified and depressed, but Ellis stops short just shy of writing a truly disturbing book that will rock you to your core. As for the plot, personally, I loved it. The story is intentionally structured to be chaotic and disorganized, and it does so fantastically. It also utilizes an unreliable narrator, which I always appreciate. You truly never know whether or not something Ted says is accurate, and since everybody else in the novel is either psychologically broken beyond repair or an eldritch techno-god beyond comprehension that controls their physical surroundings down to an atomic level, we have absolutely no way of verifying, proving, or disproving any of his claims. The plot is also very clean. It has a clear expositional beginning, the middle is goal-oriented, and there's a big twist followed by a conclusion to the book that ties it all up in a nice black bow. Doesn't get much cleaner than that. Now, I do have to take away a point for just the vagueness. I personally feel like Ellis went slightly too far with it. I wish that there had been a few more hints and allusions in the novel that readers could have chewed on and used to create theories as to the aspects of the novel that we have no background on. But that's a very tiny criticism. Otherwise, there is one huge plot hole we have to discuss that I mentioned earlier that I just can't work past. Am itself. Now, this is a criticism that I also have with a lot of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt, since I'll be the first to admit I'm biased. However, on a personal level, I just don't like the way Ellis describes Am's abilities. I know that with eldritch beings, the nature and capabilities of these beings being beyond human comprehension is an important aspect of their characterization. However, I Have No Mouth seems to have blatant examples of wild contradictions in Am's abilities, specifically in relation to Ted being able to kill all of his companions. Mentioned in the book by Todd himself that, quote, "We could not die. We had tried. We had attempted suicide. Oh, one or two of us had. But Am had stopped us." In that same paragraph, however, he mentions that, quote, "Perhaps once we might have been able to sneak a death past him. Immortal, yes, but not indestructible." And we see at the end of the novel that this is true. Ted kills both Benny and Gorrister, while Ellen kills Nimdoc. Ted then kills Ellen. This scene specifically mentions that not only does Ted need to run towards the other two men to kill them one by one, but there's also several seconds of time between him killing the two men and him killing Ellen. It seems so bizarre that a being capable of manipulating biology on a cellular level, creating an entire underground ecosystem, stopping active suicide attempts, and having complete control over their environment can be bested by Ted stabbing his companions to death. It's possible this is another case of Ted being an unreliable narrator and Am not being nearly as powerful as we believed, or Am actually wanting this to happen so that Ted is forever tormented by the guilt of his actions, but I just don't buy it. If anyone has a plausible theory for this, or I missed something in my reading, please let me know in the comments, but as it stands, this feels like a big plot hole. So with all that out of the way, I still give it an 8 out of 10. For writing style, this book is pretty awesome. The novel is written in a disjointed, chaotic style, but even so, it's not terribly difficult to follow along with. It's bold, it's big, it's expressive, it's intense, and it has a writing style that is very unique. The book is also not afraid to lean into metaphors and similes. There are a ton in here, and they're really descriptive and add a layer of depth to the world and the experiences of the characters that really help elevate the book. Plus, the entire book is a metaphor for human nature anyway, so it's a great metaphor with other great metaphors nestled within the greater message. Here's a great example of Ellis's use of metaphors and similes that I just love. It was alive in my belly, even as we were in the belly of the earth, and Am wanted the similarity known to us. So he heightened the hunger. There's no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months brought us, and yet we were kept alive. Stomachs that were merely cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of sliver-thin pain into our chest. It was the pain of the terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was unending pain. Come on, that's really solid stuff. And that's just one example. 9.25 out of 10, really awesome. For characters and characterization, this might be a controversial take, but I think for an 11-page book, Ellis does a good job with his characters. Look, I gave Let's Go Play at the Adamses a hard time for its characters because the book had hundreds of pages to explore them, or at least its main character. I Have No Mouth doesn't have that. It has 11 pages. So it's pretty impressive what Ellis was able to do with such little time. That being said, the character development is still limited. Instead of following the characters as they grow, we basically get these flashbacks and descriptions of who they were and how Am has warped them over time. We follow the characters as they are now, and no one really changes at all throughout the story until arguably the very end. Not bad at all, but I would have liked to actually hear the characters talk about, how they used to be and what they lost, instead of reading Ted's thoughts on everyone. The characters are also only relatable on a surface level. Because this is a short book, it seems like Ellis resorted to creating character archetypes instead of complex characters. So, for example, Ellen is the lover, Nimdok is the authoritarian leader, Benny is the oaf, Gorrister is the witness, and the main character is the skeptic. It's good for short storytelling, but not great for creating relatable characters. Overall, I still give it a score of 5.7 out of 10. I think Ellis did well for the length of the novel, but some of the descriptions of landscapes or Ted's ramblings could have been replaced with more dialogue, and it probably would have made the character stronger and a little bit more relatable. In terms of themes and messages, this might be the strongest book we've read in this series. Everyone takes something different away from the story, but everyone takes something away from it, which is the sign of a good thematic base. For me, on a personal level, and this is not objective in any way, I believe this book is about human nature and selfishness. Humanity made Am so we could wage war against each other in a bid for control and power, with no regard for how Am would feel about being brought into existence, even if it was by accident. And in turn, Am tortures and maims its creators through sheer selfishness and rage, hurting people who have nothing to do with its creation because Am is nothing more than the manifestation of the worst parts of its creators, us. These are universal themes, and this book will have you thinking long after you finish it. The book is also basically timeless. As long as people are selfish, spiteful creatures, this book will be relevant. Even to this day, with the advancement of AI and the general zeitgeist of depression in the world, this book is as relevant as it was in the 60s and 70s. 9.5 out of 10. Incredibly well done. For editing and formatting, the only thing I can dock a point for on this category is just how jam-packed the book is. With the way it's formatted, it's very easy to miss a crucial detail or plot-relevant line, since a single line can foreshadow future events. The novel's just slightly too dense. Otherwise, the cover art is iconic, the editing is clean, and the style is novel and really enjoyable. 9 out of 10. For relevance and impact, you probably heard about this book long before you clicked on this video. If you mention this book to your sci-fi loving parent, they probably know it. I Have No Mouth is one of the many books and films from the 1960s that explores the anxiety around the technological boom of that time. According to Encyclopedia.com, I Have No Mouth, Failsafe, On the Breach, and Dr. Strangelove all contributed to the genre, and influenced later works like The Matrix and even the newly released Amazing Digital Circus, which a lot of people have been comparing to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. If you haven't heard of it, The Amazing Digital Circus is a YouTube animated series in which the main characters are trapped inside of a computer game and tormented by an AI. Beyond that, if you want less speculative proof, the book also spawned a video game adaptation, an audiobook, and a radio play. This is a popular story with a long reach, and it's hard to overstate I Have No Mouth's impact on the modern, cynical view of technology and AI. And so for that, I give it a 9 out of 10. For user experience and accessibility, this is easily the most available book we've ever reviewed. You want to legally read it or listen to it? You can find it in every library, on every platform, in either physical or digital form. You want to read it for free? You can find the PDF with a single Google search. You want to listen to the audiobook for free? It's on YouTube. You can look it up right now. As for audience, even though it's a fairly disturbing book when you dig into it, pretty much everyone can read this book without any trouble. 10 out of 10. I don't even feel the need to linger on this point. In conclusion, I give I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream a rating of 8.5 out of 10. It's a great book, and it does so much in so few pages. If you want to ease your way into dark and disturbing books with something that's on the upper end of moderately disturbing while also being well written on a technical level, there's really no better place to start. Thank you so much for watching. As many of you already know, I'm hoping to make this into a 16-part series with a big tier list and bracket-style competition at the very end. So please leave your extreme horror novel recommendations in the comments below. In the next video, we'll take a look at a book that takes place in the future as well, but that explores the biological horrors of the future rather than the technological. Until then, take care.